actually, it was just after COVID.
So, Sadi Ahmed, thank you for going through your journey and the different parts of your life that basically came together as a culmination at the end where you felt the need and were inspired to write your thoughts in Rethinking Islam in the West, which is a presentation that we're going to experience in Bradford at the Bradford Literature Festival. But what's been really interesting when I read your book, especially the life journey, what was interesting to me was to kind of dissect and understand with yourself is because this idea of balance and rethink Islam as the West is something that you've been developing over the last 3-4 years and enhancing and developing these ideas. How would you say the communities and the students and the individuals that have come across this presentation have received it? And is this something where there's an appetite for them to embrace this, or is there work to be done for people to truly understand the narrative and the ideas that you're trying to disseminate?
The thesis itself is very simple.
Mm,
The problem is the paradigm shift.
mm,
The problem is that we are so enmeshed in the modern narrative. It informs our language.
mm,
It informs the world we're living in. It informs people's jobs. It informs the media, everything. It's like a cocoon that has been woven around us.
mm,
And it's very difficult to free oneself from it
mm,
in order to enter into the perspective of another paradigm.
mm-hmm.
That's the problem. Once you actually arrive at that paradigm,
It's relatively easy and smooth.
it's clear.
It's clear.
It's clear as light. The thing is that what happens, what I found in my 9 years in Cambridge, because I've been a visiting fellow for 9 years, and they've tolerated me up until now simply because, quite frankly, they don't realise that I'm actually attacking the very substance of their whole existence.
Mm-hmm.
The whole academic approach is an approach which is is the problem.
Mm-hmm.
So what's actually happened is that what I found taking place, the first lecture I gave, which I think you attended, my illustrated lecture
Yes,
in 2014 on April the 27th,
I did, correct.
that was the first time I presented the case, and the reaction was incredible. And people came up to me afterwards and said to me, it was amazing because I had all these thoughts flowing around my head, but they've now just, everything comes together.
Mm,
It all makes sense. Suddenly, it all, the way you presented it, it all comes together.
mm,
What I have found is that I've, since then, over this 9 years, I've given talks, seminars, I published this book, then I published this book.
mm-hmm.
And each of the events, very good audience, very good response. But it wasn't until last summer that I really began to feel that it was actually sticking.
Mm.
In other words, people get it and then it disappears.
And why did you feel that? Why did you realize that last year?
Because the students started coming to me
Right, okay.
and they had understood it. They had understood it. And there were students who really had completely got it. Now, a lot of this was to do with the fact that Hassan Spiker had a circle before he went to Zaytuna College. And that group of students were absolutely prepared for it.
Mm-hmm.
So they then started reading the books.
Mm.
And they came to me, and they were the ones who said, let's have a study circle to go deeper into the book, which then led to what we're doing in Bradford. So what I feel is that it's now actually breaking through. In other words, for the first time, I feel I'm actually handing the concept on to a body of students who understand it.
And is that your vision and what you really wanted to do with this?
Yeah, obviously, I want to get rid of it. I want some peace and quiet. No, but it's a part of one's. If you have something, you want it to live,
Mm.
and you have a responsibility.
Because we saw in the last presentation that you did in Cambridge, I believe in November, where we really saw that, where you saw the students and the teachers and
Yeah, yeah, well, there.
educators and all coming together and
Yeah,
really, really, like you said, really sticking and buying into this whole concept.
yeah, that's it.
And is that the same thing that we wanted to do in Bradford and various other
Bradford
communities?
is just a continuation, but improvement, because we've gone deeper into it. We only had 2 months when we put on the November
Yeah.
27th,
Mm.
and there were areas which were weak, which we wanted to strengthen, but it was enough. We had enough on November the 27th to be able to put the whole thesis across.
Mm.
Now it's deeper, but the thing is that once you enter into this realm, there's no end to it. There's no end to it. I mean, you see, I was asked as a visiting fellow at the Centre of Islamic Studies. We have every year there's a research day, and they put me down to read a chapter of my book. This was last year, and I thought that's a bit tame. I mean, I can do something more than that. I'm just reading a chapter of the book. That doesn't involve anything. I was thinking to myself, how can you put this MIZAN thesis across? How could you get it across in a simple way? So I thought, I've got it. And I had 7 slides. And the first slide was the Leicester City Football Club
Mm-hmm.
team that won the Premier League. And I said, that is the perfection of MIZAN.
Mm.
This team, there was no hope that team would ever win. They were the bottom of the league. The idea that they would beat all the great teams is just impossible over a whole season, and they did it in spades. Why? Because they were one. Every single role was played perfectly in relationship to the other roles. The whole thing was a perfect example of MIZAN. And then the second thing is I showed them the pitch, the football pitch. Perfect scale. If it was bigger, it would be too big.
Mm.
Players would get lost. If it was smaller, it would be crowded. The number of players, 11 on each side, they reached the perfect number. The goal. If the goal was slightly, then I had a penalty taker. For the penalty taker, the goal is very small. The goal is very big. If the goal was bigger, it would too much advantage the shooter. If it was too smaller, it would advantage the thing. It just is the right size to just advantage the kicker. Perfect. It's arrived in its perfect state. Then you have the referee, justice. It has to work according to rules.
Mm.
If you break the rules, it starts to descend into chaos. And then finally you have the manager on the side, who is like God, over looking the thing, seeing where it can be improved, where it can be, what's needed. The form is perfect. Football arrived out of what they used to call mob football, which is a game which had no rules. Any number could play it, and you just had to get a sheep's carcass or something from one end of the village to the other. And in the process, people died. And that was what was going on. That was what was happening in the public schools. And it was in the public schools that they then ordered it. And out of that came rugby, in which you could only carry the ball, and football, where you could kick it. Those games arrived at a perfect form. You could go on playing football in terms of those rules forever. You could play it well, you could play it badly. You have good games, you have bad, but the form is perfect. It's like the form of chess arrived at its perfect form, in which you could play the game any number of times. You go on playing, you never exhaust it, but the form remains constant. If you look at Dar al-Islam, the form is perfect. Any number of humanity can go on playing.
Yeah.
You know, they can play it well, they can play it badly. You can have the highest of saints, you can have the greatest of rogues. They're not going to break the form. The form allows for the whole drama of human life to take place in its complete way. That is what is so incredible about Dar al-Islam, the abode of Islam. That world that was created out of revelation and lasted for more than 1,000 years. So look at it like a game of football. Look at it, understand, because people have muddled form and content. They've muddled the fact, they say, there were bad judges, so the Sharia must be, nonsense. There will always be bad judges. There will always be evil rulers. There will always be greedy merchants. The remarkable thing in Islam is that it was the good merchants who were celebrated. It was the ones who created waqfs. It was the good rulers who were celebrated. It was the good judges who, and the great thing is you could always tell who was good and who was bad because of the form. It was constant. And that is the remarkable thing about that form. And until you realize that form is unlike any other form, because it is the only universal form. Every other civilization, the Chinese, the Indian, the Persian, the European, Christendom was only contained within the Roman world. When it went out, it went on the back, on the the back of conquerors and merchants. It wasn't like Islam. It didn't produce a world which was governed by the revelation. So this is where I say, once you understand that, there's no end to it. The fact is that we know we have not been looking at the world of Islam in the right way.
Sidi Ahmed, just to kind of rewind slightly and go back to analysing the West, or the modern age, and the crises that it's ushered in, the multiple crises that it's ushered in, and looking back at your life and how you, through being in theatre and being in those kind of cultural milieus, were able to understand modernity for what it is. How important do you think that is for people or institutions who they intuit that the West and modernity is in crisis, but the reaction is more of a visceral kind of emotional reaction rather than an intellectual one? And I suppose institutions like Zaytuna College that you mentioned, and more locally here, Cambridge Muslim College, are trying to educate students to understand the West and modernity as it is, in order to critique it. Something that Imam al-Ghazali, as you well know, was very famous for. He would never critique something until he was confident that he understood it fully. How important do you think that is in this day and age for people who are sensing that the modernity is just ushering crisis after crisis, but don't seem to know how to intellectualize the response?
I think where the MIZAN thesis helps is in completely separating and showing that the world of Islam and modernity are two completely separate worlds. There's no connection between them. They're totally separate. It's like saying the separation between Islam and the Jahiliyyah was made absolute. It wasn't a mission of trying to, reorder Jahiliyyah in order to, or reorder Islam in order to fit in with Jahiliyyah. There was a recognition that these were two completely different worlds. So the first step is to understand that these are two completely separate worlds, working on different principles, with different philosophies, with different ways of life, different art forms, different education, everything. Different way of understanding the world. And that's the first step. Once that is comprehended, the second step is to realize that Islam, in its manifestation as a world, perfectly manifested MIZAN, the middle way. It perfectly manifested, because that is the essence of Islam. And it was perfectly manifested. Why? I mean, it perfectly manifested many things. But why do we talk about MIZAN? We talk about MIZAN because it is the one thing that we can see quite clearly has now been broken. We're living in the age when the MIZAN has been broken. The balance has been upset. We have, you talk to anybody and they'll agree. We're out of balance with nature. The human beings are out of balance. Societies are. You've now got people who are billionaires, and you've got people who can't even find the food to last a day on this planet. The gulf is just horrendous. Now, when you look at Islam, you see that the form that manifested itself to create this unique world, this universal world, from West Africa to China, manifested MIZAN. Now, once you understand that, you then realize that what the situation is now is not one of trying to recreate that. This is terribly important. That's a kind of insanity. We can't. It's like if you see a tsunami, you're told, and you see the waves coming in the sea towards the land, you don't go and put your bikini on and go down to the beach. You move up to higher ground. You go for a refuge.
Safety.
And it's this, and Islam has always been about safety. It's to make the human being safe.
The Sharia was
Absolutely.
sent for that reason.
It's exactly that.
Empowerment for human safety and integrity and honour.
Exactly.
In this life and the next.
Exactly. That's exactly it. So this is the important thing. So one has to recognize the nature of the time we're living in, and not go on a quest to try to marry Islam and modernity. This has been the great quest because, I was at the educational conference in Mecca in 1977, the first great educational conference. And there was the real attempt, the wish to Islamicize the Western curriculum. It was to Islamicize the sciences. It was the idea that the sciences also were neutral. They're not. The modern sciences are the product of a modern philosophy and way of looking at the world. And of course, as we show in our presentation in the book, it is the most delusional way, because the mind that is least capable of understanding the great mystery of creation is the modern reasoning mind, because it only believes in the material existence. It only believes in the material. So it tries to work out the story from that. That's where in the MIZAN thesis you've got the mereological principle.
Yes.
The whole can contain the part, but the part cannot contain the whole. And if the part attempts to be a whole, it'll create an aberration. It's like I was saying about the trying to work out ways of explaining this. It's like a man who lives, people who live in the tropical forest, who say were unable to climb trees because the creatures that existed in the trees were too ferocious. So they never got off the ground. They were on the ground. And they couldn't see the sky because of the canopy, the evergreen canopy of the forest. how would they explain rain? How could they explain rain? So how can the modern detached reasoning mind that can only exist within the material realm, how can it understand the creation of the universe? The great mystery. And of course they're becoming more and more confused. I mean, their ideas of string theories and multiple universes, I mean, they're in a complete state of meltdown now in their thinking. It's a mystery. It's a mystery. And it's a mystery that we as human beings cannot penetrate through our reasoning minds. It's impossible. And this is where, in Islam, this is where when you follow the great thinkers of Islam through to the final destination of the reasoning mind, they come to that point of sublime submission, peace, total wonder, and complete knowledge of the reality of the Creator. Not a belief, they know. That's where they arrived at. This is amazing. And it's there. It's in the books. It's there, but it's just, it has to be
understood.
Yeah, because the whole idea, this 50 years ago, it was very difficult for people to even begin to think like this. But now it's we're in a different situation.
Sure.
And fortunately, and I see this at Cambridge, the young Muslims are arriving who are morally intact. The most precious thing that youth has.
Right.
They're morally intact and they're beautiful young people. And Almighty Allah is producing a wonderful crop. Alhamdulillah, what a show He has for us.
It's like you were saying earlier, he's it's his play, he's the director.
He's the director.
He's going to complete the show in the way that he wants, and that it was meant to happen.
Yeah.
So, and that is so beautiful the way you explain that, because it helps us to sometimes when we see these crises and these difficulties out there, to kind of take a step back as a believer to say, look, it's in good hands.
Yeah, exactly.
The Lord's in control.
There's no worry.
So we just need to surrender and do what we need to do rather than get swamped and overwhelmed with all the crises and issues out there.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
And we all have our small tasks to do.
Yeah.
And that's enough.
Keep planting your seed.
Yes, that's all. Alhamdulillah. And not, people talk about hope. Well, the most dangerous thing is false hope.
Absolutely. Delusion, false hope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's false hope. And look at this beautiful garden. Look at the mystery of this garden. Every year I see these plants coming out, and then they die. It's incredible. So this is
this is like the reflection of the divine symmetry and the beauty and the
it's
majesty.
just anything, a leaf, a plant, there's a wonderful moment when all the cherry trees, the blossoms have come out on the trees. All the blossoms have come out. Great array. And then they go. And then there's a kind of period when what you have is an intensity of the greenery, the leaves, but little colour, it's intense, and then the roses come out. So it's like a pause before the roses then come out. So, Mamma Mia, Alhamdulillah, it's just a wonder. But no, this book is there to help to clear people's minds.
And do you feel in the last couple of years, since you've been arranging certain talks and certain programs and presentations, has it started to spread? Have people?
They're telling me now.
Okay.
No, I'm learning. I'm on a learning spree, because the point is that this is like a kind of the sketch. This is just the thesis, but they're the ones who will fill it in, and they're the ones who will take you through into the big time. But it's just once it's a paradigm shift, and as I said to you, the problem with modernity is that when I was a child, this modern thing, this modern, what I call a cult, this modern cult didn't command morality and ethics. That was under the sway of Christianity and civilization. That was under the sway of Christianity. So the morality was completely under the church.
So now, in many ways, we have
No, it's
more optimism and hope because, like you said, the people are arriving with a moral intact. There's
for the Muslims, it's a fantastic.
for
No,
Muslims,
no, no. For Muslims, but why? Because Islam, there's no, in the heart of Islam, there is no confusion. There's complete clarity. If you think about how the formation of Islam, 23 years of revelation. The Holy Quran, which is not a huge book, but that book took 23 years to be revealed. And it came through the Holy Prophet ﷺ in a community of all the different types of humanity. There were scholars, there were merchants, there were people who were of the land, there were nomads, there were everything. Every type of human being and every type of woman. So it was a complete community that received and lived the revelation. That's the important thing. They lived it. Imagine, they lived it. That was it. And it was the most intense period in human history that we can think of. Nothing can compare with that. And once that happened, Islam spread like
wildfire. Yeah.
It was successful. And everybody from people who put things in the ground, to people who looked after sheep, to people who did trade, to people who ruled, to scholars, to families, to women, to everything, to craftspeople, loved their prophet. And they loved their deen. Can you think of any other religion that has this universal engagement with its community? Belonged to all of them. And that's why Islam had this incredible stability. Because all those worlds were they were self-engaged. All the parts were working together.
All the parts making the whole.
Yeah. And that's what this is what we show in the oneness of Dar al-Islam. Now, that's gone because this other thing has happened. This other world came and broke the rule and released these powers. This is the other principle of the MIZAN principle, of the Chthonic principle. Chthonic, the god of the underworld, the god of underneath, the powers beneath. Because the more you go into the physical world, the greater the powers that are released and the more devastating the unintended consequences. And we see this. This is what we show in the presentation. This is the most powerful evidence of the crises we're facing. They never expected, the scientists, when they went into the material realm, when they went to conquer nature, to wring from nature her secrets, they never expected the unintended consequences. And that's what happened. But that's all a part of the play. People say to me, you're against modern. I'm not against modern. I'm not against anything. And that part, I'm for. But I know exactly what that is. I know what it is. You know, how I'm sitting in Cambridge, in the place which is probably the most powerful agent for the crises we're facing. More ideas have come out of Cambridge which have ended up with Nobel Prizes and which have ended up destroying our world than probably anywhere else on earth. And it's awesome. It's awesome. And it's happened, and it has to happen, it's a part of the play. But for the Muslim, it's the knowledge of this that's important.
Interesting. Okay.
You know, and the knowledge should really reinforce their realization of the reality of Islam. Because you see, everything that's happening at the moment is to turn everything into unreality, an unreal world. Everything, postmodernism is all about everything is, everything is everything is of equal value. Everything, in fact, in other words, chaos.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is very, very, it is eating into everything. So for the Muslims, they need to realize this. In order to realize that central core, al-haq, is inviolate. That is not going to disappear. They can destroy the area around the Kaaba. They can take out that wonderful, beautiful arcade built by Sinan, the great Ottoman architect, which enclosed the Kaaba. And they can remove it and turn, create a stadium, concrete stadium around it. They can go around, but the Kaaba remains.
Yeah.
They can build buildings that overlook the Kaaba, which never happened before. Go, out into the sky, but the Kaaba remains. And that's where we are.
So in an age, like you said, of crises, confusion, ignorance, and all these different issues that people are facing, how do we stay rooted as a community and stay grounded to live the tradition so that we are not swayed by these different narratives and ideas?
Follow our teachers. We have the teachers. They're telling us all the time how to behave. This is where we don't have a problem. We have sheikhs and teachers who carry the knowledge of Islam. And they know, they're there. They're teaching, they're telling us how to behave. It all boils down to this. How do you behave? How do you behave on this earth which is pleasing to Almighty Allah? And that's what they're teaching us all the time. And we have wonderful teachers. So cling to these teachers, that's the point. This is not I'm not a teacher in this respect.
So that's basically the solution, isn't it? Cling to our teachers, follow their way.
And increase our understanding of what being realistic, because the beautiful thing about Islam is it's the reality of it. It's to be realistic. So don't imagine things are not are what they are not.
Yes, agreed.
Put
things in the right place,
yes,
in the right way, and don't overinflate them or make them bigger than they need to be. Okay.
And things like don't think that what we had a wonderful world before and we can recreate that. You can't.
No. So you have to be in the waqt, in the present,
this
now.
is fantastic. The present. To be a witness during a time of crisis is the most wonderful opportunity as a Muslim. Mamma mia! Look at that.
If anything, it's to a tipping point. We've discussed this. I think personally, since on a personal level, being involved with you in the project and see these communities, I really do believe that the Muslims, in particular, like you said, we just have to raise the awareness and the understanding and allow them to reattach to these ideas and these principles. But like you said, once that paradigm shift happens, the clarity and the lack of ambiguity it's so clear.
Yeah.
And people will then be able to embrace that. And we've seen that in the number of communities that we've visited, the people. I think the initial challenge is when you've been thinking or set in your ways and initially challenging that paradigm to be able to change that.
Yeah.
And do you think that is something that may be a struggle, or have you experienced people where they're receptive, that the paradigms are willing to be changed? How entrenched are people, do you think, in their way of thinking with modernity and progress or so-called enlightenment?
For the Muslims,
Yeah.
the great problem, and the thing that the Muslims for a very long time have been wrestling with, is the fact they were conquered. How could this world that was so successful that literally was ruling for more than 1,000 years, how could it be overwhelmed? You know, this is a big question that is at the very root of so much of the Muslim thinking. And we're now beginning to, it's now becoming clear that that conquest that was received by the Muslims was a Pyrrhic victory in terms of the West. Now, you know, a Pyrrhic victory is one which is it may be a victory for a time, but in the end it's going to overwhelm you. So the attempt of the West from the Renaissance onwards to become the centre and to conquer nature and to become, you know, the measure of all things and the controllers of the universe, that was given a leash for a time, but now it's clear that it's a failed thing. And the way in which it destroyed so much, I mean, look at what's happened. Look at what's happened in terms of the destruction. And every month now we have a new calamity which is being presented to us. And it's accelerating. So this is the time when, for the Muslims, it's in a sense a time of recovering the vision of Islam. Because now the religion is beautifully looked after. But it's the vision and understanding of what happened after the Prophet departed. Because the idea that somehow Islam failed as a world because it was overwhelmed, that's a very powerful psychology in the Muslim mind. And it's also to do with the fact that whenever a world is conquered, it takes on the mantle of the conqueror.
Yeah.
It starts to think like the conqueror.
It starts to think like the powers to be above them.
Yeah. And we now know that way of thinking is not good. And that's the MIZAN
So
thesis.
do you think a conquered mind can be revived?
Of course, I mean, astaghfirullah. We might talk about it anyway.
I'm just, of course.
No, I mean, you know, Almighty Allah will, you know, look at. I only have to think of my own miserable life in the sense that the people I've met have taken me out of. I mean, when I met Mahmoud Mirza, he literally took me out of the chaos. I always talk about this. It's like I was drowning in a sea, and he just picked me up and shook me off and put me on solid ground. So all of us, and we know the process by which we have to seek this in terms of you know, praying and asking Almighty Allah to support and help, and we know all of this. And as far as what will happen, or the difficulties, what I see happening now is, as far as my work is concerned, and the insights that I've been given through the immense generosity of so many people, and through Almighty Allah taking me through an extraordinary journey, where I was, you know, put through this and then put through that and put through that, in order that I could understand certain things. As far as I can see, that this is actually beginning to get across. And I've had I'm now in my 80s, you know. I'm what is generally termed an old man. And I've had the benefit of a lifetime where I've been able to live fairly anonymously. I've always been a behind-the-scenes man, an organizer, you know, enjoying seeing, you know, things being created and basking in the presence of very great people. So I'm finding it a funny time for me to be the one who's actually out there. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
I'm with my dear friend Waseem Mahmood, and we've just done a recording which is a preparation for the Bradford Literature Festival, when we're going to be appearing, or rather I'm appearing, and you're going to be there supporting
and endorsing and sharing and making sure the whole community of Bradford and the Northwest comes to this amazing program with my dear beloved elder Ahmed Paul Keeler. But Ahmed, can you just briefly let the audience know these Rethinking Islam in the West, something that you've been working very closely on for the last few years, what to expect in Bradford?
They're going to be presented with the most wonderful multimedia dramatic presentation by a group of students from Cambridge University, joined by some wonderful scholars and Shaykhs. So it's a major presentation of the MIZAN thesis. And if you want to know what that is, you must come on June the 24th at 10 o'clock in the morning, bright and early, with all your confidence and all your clarity there, ready to receive something very special.
Inshallah, we'll see you on Saturday the 24th of June at the Bradford Literature Festival. Come with your friends and your family and come and be inspired by my dear brother, Elder Sidi Ahmed Paul Keeler.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.